Welcome to Dead Man Talking. Tonight's story is a two-part story by the incredible mind of RevBlackRage over on Reddit. As ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid crew. And so, with that aside, let's get into the first part of tonight's story, entitled Bull's Heart, Texas. Part 1. Let's get straight into that. I work in a place called Bull's Heart, Texas. I'm a sheriff deputy. Sort of. Technically, I'm a federal agent. No, I haven't been to Portland recently. Nevertheless, I'm supposed to protect and serve the people of Bull's Heart. Keep a lid on things and keep the calm. But quite honestly, Jesus fuck, I hate this town. I mean, sure, the people are nice in their own odd way. They recognize that I have a rough job, mostly due to the nature of the citizenry itself. And they know that, and they respect that. It doesn't stop them from getting rowdy. It doesn't stop them going after each other and creating situations that I have got to put my damn full self in the middle of. It doesn't stop the collection of scars on my body getting bigger. It doesn't stop the nightmares either. But they seem to appreciate the fact that this job, it's an ass kicker. Which is nice, I suppose. If I was a milkman or ran a gas station or some shit, I might not hate the town as much. But then again, if I hadn't signed a 40-year contract with threat of life in a federal pen, if I broke said contract, I probably would have hung it up and pushed on down the road a piece. People in this town know they can't control their nature. Some got a handle on it better than the others, but most know that they are one stressful day away from a good blow-up. And that's where me and the sheriff's department come in. And sometimes it's a simple matter of sitting a body down and letting them vent out their frustrations. And sometimes it's so bad that we have to call the big feds in. I hate doing that. Those boys and girls come in wide-eyed, terrified, and heavily armed. Fear? It's a motherfucker. And when it has a Beowulf 50 cal loaded with consecrated depleted uranium tipped rounds, it can be a real bloody son of a bitch. The fact of the matter is that the citizens of Bull's Heart are better off in this town than they would be out in the world. At least so far as normal folks like you or me are concerned. Just because folks are different doesn't mean they are evil. But sometimes, evil is a relative concept. The people have a lot of respect for me. A normal guy, albeit with some technological assistance, throwing down with the nastiest of their nature when they get less than civil. Hell, they respect the other guys that do this job too. But I'm one of the few normal guys who do it, and so they give us just a pinch of extra respect. But it doesn't stop us from getting our asses handed to us and occasionally getting gored to death or ripped apart or eaten or drained of blood or I could go on, but you get the picture. I was hoping for a relaxed evening as I pulled my armoured Dodge Charger Interceptor into the parking lot of the only place a fella could get decent food at this godforsaken hour. I was something of a regular when I was on shift, and they knew me. They knew when I liked to stop in and usually had a plate of food for me. A woman wearing a typical diner's waitress uniform was standing out front having a smoke as I walked up to the door. And she had worked the counter at Toothy L's as long as anyone could remember. She was a little long in the tooth these days though. She carried a little more weight and her voice was a little harsher. Her fur had a little more grey in it. Supposedly, she had been quite a looker in her youth though. And she turned her head towards me as I walked up to the front doors. Her big yellow eyes got a little wider as she flashed me a fang-riddled grin. her ears tilted forward in my direction a little. "Well, if it isn't the long arm of the law," she rasped at me, and with a little purr in her voice, like she always did. She leaned in, closed her eyes and nuzzled her fuzzy cheek against mine, and she was one of my biggest fans, ever since a bus got lost on the way to a furry convention in Houston, got off the highway and stopped at the diner. They had mobbed her, pouring at her and telling her they loved her costume. And when she was cornered, she went into fight mode. She damn near went full feral on them. Older gal or not, she had claws and a few thousand years of hand-to-hand combat experience. And she had taken a right eye of a fat man in a My Little Pony t-shirt and cargo shorts. And by the time that I could get through the crowd to her, I took some cuts myself, but it was understandable given the circumstances. I bear no ill will towards her. She, however, had felt awful about tearing out that dumbass's eye, but when she explained the situation to me, I was ready to arrest the little creep myself. He had been fondling her, thinking he was fondling a costume and refusing to back off. I mean, what the fuck? Even if she wasn't a costume, you still don't go around touching people who don't want to be touched. Ellie didn't want to press charges though. She felt that losing his depth perception was enough of a punishment, even though she had done it in the heat of the moment and not in her rational mind. "Hey Ellie," I said, giving her a gentle pat on the back. "Everything all right?" Quiet as the grave, hon," she said while taking a drag off a Virginia Slim. "I got food waiting for you in there. Go eat. You're getting skinny." "Yes, ma'am." I watched the scrawny striper walking towards my table in my favourite corner at Toothy L's eatery. He must have been new, because he was gripping both sides of my plate with stained white fingers. He was holding on to my steak and eggs like his life depended on it, and at L's, it did. You could always tell the new ones because they weren't used to their new environs. They're all anxious, energy and fear. Speak to some of them too loud and they shit themselves, literally. The stripers are what we call the various shitbags and death row inmates will get sent to our town to serve the people. Keep a sense of normalcy for the inhabitants trying to live something of a normal life. Maybe provide a meal every once in a while. Think of them as indentured servants without the attached value of life. They are dropped here and put to work for the rest of their sentences. In the old days, they used to wear striped prison uniforms, and that's how the name took root, even though they dress differently now. "Keep the masters with the masters," the old sheriff had always said. "Let us sort each other out," and he would finish with a diabolical laugh. He didn't refer to the people of this town as monsters, in a degenerating way, of course. He was one. I don't mean that in a bad way either. Sheriff on Ryu was literally the physical manifestation of a demon whose particular wheelhouse was vengeance. He stood 9 feet tall, had 3 legs, skin that resembled the strike here part of a matchbox, 4-inch fangs and claws, the whole 9 yards. A crown of green fire always burned above his bald head, whether he was wearing his brown round campaign hat or not. And green flames blazed out of his eye sockets as well. When he wore his silver-rimmed aviators, he looked like an Iron Maiden album cover. He had the voice to match too. Shit was involuntarily terrifying. And part of being the physical manifestation of vengeance, demon, I suppose. Keep in mind, I said, the physical manifestation of. It wasn't actually the demon, or even a demon. It was some metaphysical nonsense that he tried to explain to me over beers once. Something about him growing stronger than the actual demon and killing its mind and then breaking free. That didn't make sense to me, but not a lot about Bull's Heart, Texas actually does. Hell of a boss though. Tough, but fair. And the striper wordlessly placed the food down in front of me. The patches on his shirt said he was a child murderer. The 3 red stars at the bottom of the child murderer's patch said he was a paedophile as well. I was utterly incapable of feeling pity for the terrified man. Well, the food looked good though, as it always did at Toothy Earl's, but something was missing. "Hey, shitbag," I said in my best prison guard's voice. "Where's my coffee?" Well, the striper looked at me with all the hate a man could muster. It looked like he was about to vent some of his stress in my direction. A bad choice for any striper. When I heard something make a righteous racket back in the kitchen, like a metal spatula being thrown across a hot griddle. The striper popped up straight at the sound, wide-eyed terror on his face. His head turned towards the service window between the front of the diner and the kitchen in the back. The man acting as my waiter let out a nervous moan. He brought his hands up into a ball under his chin, and his eyes went wide. A few of the other regulars turned their heads our way, hoping for a show, I reckon. Earl ran a tight ship. He didn't like when his customers came into his establishment, plonked down their hard-earned money, and got poor service in return. And when a waitress or waiter was a regular citizen of the town, they might have gotten a talking to or an ass chewing, as they were good people, more or less. In the case of stripers, the ass chewing could be a little more literal. "Marcel," a voice called from the kitchen. The voice sounded like it was bubbling up through a drowned man's voice box. "Did you not remember our talk? What comes before the food?" The striper looked down, pressing his balled-up fists into his eyes. His response was a terrified murmur. Tears were streaming down his face at this point. This was a pretty typical reaction for most stripers who were new in town. "I don't think I heard you, Marcel." The drowning man's voice floated out from the back again. "Drink before food," Marcel stammered out. "That's right," the voice confirmed. "Drink before food. They don't leave the deputy waiting. He takes his coffee with lots of cream and sugar because he has such a sweet disposition." Earl's voice had a note of playfulness to it. Upon mentioning my general attitude towards the world, well, as much as that voice could sound playful. The striper probably didn't pick up on that. You had to stick around for a while to pick up on these sort of things, and most stripers, they didn't survive long enough. "Thanks, Earl," I called out to the kitchen. A large 3-fingered, scaly hand about the size of a dinner plate reached through the service window. A thumb ended in a massive claw extended upwards. "No problem, deputy," I warbled back. "A favourable Yelp review will be appreciated." That got a snort of a couple of the regulars sitting at the bar. It was an inside joke. I've been known to leave the occasional Yelp review. I don't know why people give me shit for it. Quality service should be praised and bad service should be mentioned so the establishment can get better. But for some reason, which is beyond me, people like to give me a rasher of shit for it. I don't see the humour in it, frankly. "Fuck you, Earl," I said back as monotone as possible. One of the regulars at the bar let rip with an outright laughter. "Charming as always, deputy," the drowning man's voice called back, cheerfully busting my balls. Earl had known me long enough that he knew I meant nothing by it, or I wouldn't have made the joke. I could take Earl in a fight with the proper equipment, of course, but he had started life as a water deity for a tribe somewhere on the Nile River Delta, one of the gods folks prayed to before they went out and fucked someone up, and so fights that he was involved with didn't tend to be fun affairs, and so I generally try and keep it affable with him. I realised the striper was still standing next to my table. His hands were balled up at his sides, his eyes squeezed shut. He was muttering something. It sounded like a prayer. Now, a fella in his fearful condition might seem someone deserving of compassion. I'm here to say he is not. He has earned every bit of this. He has earned this torment. Now I know what you're saying. What if he was wrongly convicted of his crimes? What if it was a frame-up? What if he's a good guy caught in a bad situation? Allow me to hang a light on it for you. That shit happens in the real world. In this town, people know evil, can sniff it out like a bloodhound. Hell, some of them help write the definition of the word. Now the government has tried to use us to disappear people, before my time, or so I'm told. They found out that shit doesn't fly real fast. The people of Bull's Heart aren't a tool for slaughtering suspected communists, just folks tired of living in the dark and wanting to live around people they might have a thing or two in common with. It doesn't mean they can't still fuck shit up. So when I say the government found out real quick that shit don't fly, they found out real hard. You ever heard of Herbert Gilroy Chalmers? No? Nobody has. He was the president of the United States for about 3 months, at some point in the early 1900s. No one is exactly sure which 3 months though. Now there is some speculation as to which town he pissed off. Might have been Bull's Heart or one of its sister townships or colonies. But for purposes of local pride, around here we say it was Bull's Heart. But anyway, do try to lay down the law on a town full of nightmares and myths. And now he doesn't even exist in history books. You figure that shit out. We're actually on the 46th president, and nobody knows it. Sorry, got off on a tangent there. Despite my hatred of the job, I can at least admit that the town has one hell of a fascinating history. Nature of it, and all. The fearful striper looked dead set on finishing his prayer. I was more dead set on getting some caffeine. I rapped my fingers on the table to get his attention. I raised my eyebrows at the dude, giving him a look that said, "Chop chop, motherfucker." The striper looked down at me. His eyes flicked to the steak knife sitting next to my untouched steak and eggs. I could see what he wanted to do. I was used to being viewed as a soft target by rambunctious stripers. I'm not. When you stack me next to some of the folks around here, it might just appear that way. Most of the normies living in this town look like soft targets compared to everything else. They weren't either though. Like most Texans who lived outside the big cities, you had to be tough to get by. In Bull's Heart, even more so. I placed my finger on the plastic handle of the steak knife. I met his eyes and slid the blade closer to him. I was damn near daring him at this point. "How do you want your day to end?" I asked him. "You want to go back to lockup? Get a smooze in? Wake up and face tomorrow, all bright-eyed and bushy-tailed? Or..." I motioned with my head towards a couple of fellas at the bar arguing over who was going to win the Super Bowl this year. Dallas or Houston. This is Texas, after all. You want to be someone's dinner. And the striper, Marcel, looked down at the knife. And then his eyes flicked up at me and back down at the knife again. A fat bead of sweat rolled down the side of his face. He ran his tongue across his suddenly dry upper lip as his eyes lost focus. I could tell he wanted to gut me. Old Bubba Ray over there is a vegetarian, but he doesn't mind taking a bite out of a striper every now and again, I said, not taking my finger off of the knife. Now see, he has blunt teeth, not meant for ripping throats out, meant for mashing down grass and the occasional bug, not for ripping and tearing. So he has to mash his meat before he can swallow it. Just big, massive blunt teeth, pulping muscle and tissue down. Can you imagine what that feels like, Marcel? I leaned back in my chair, removing my hands from the table and putting them in my lap, presenting an easier target to him. I pulled his daughter out of a flipped-over pickup truck that had the temerity to be on fire at the time. Got myself cooked up pretty good in the process, but she lived, starting high school next year. Good kid. Old Bubba Ray has pledged something of a lifetime debt to me. Now, of course, I told him that wasn't necessary, of course. But you know how daddies are with their kids. You saved their babies' lives. They think you hung the moon. Marcel's eyes darted over towards the large fellow with horns wearing a 5XL JJ Watt jersey. Bubba's horns could put a Longhorns rack to shame. They ended in nasty points that Bubba meticulously kept sharp. Not for intimidation, mind, but because he liked to look presentable. And Bubba Ray was getting deep into his gridiron debate, and I could tell he was getting serious too. He was banging his hoof on the floor, as if he was punctuating individual points of merit. I could tell that Marcel was deep in the middle of an internal struggle. He was close to the breaking point. Problem for him is that I really like fucking with these guys. I leaned forward on my chair a little bit, doing my best to bore my eyes right through Marcel's. I straightened up my shoulders a little. I stared up at Marcel from under my eyebrows and gave him a mocking grin. One of those ones that a crazy fella in the movie might make when he's trying to fuck with a heroic protagonist. Marcel's peepers flicked to that serrated meat cutter again, and I placed my elbow back on the table. We both know you ain't got the sack for it, boy, I said, shoving every bit of high school bully into my voice that I could muster. Calling him boy was a bit of a mock, since he must have been at least 10 years my senior. That's why you went for kids, wasn't it? Marcel's eyes bored back into mine, anger darkening those baby blues of his. And that was it. The striper was nothing but a rat fuck looking to feel tough. I had a notion as to what made him tick. You know what fucks with these guys the most? Well, you just lay their shit out in front of them, make them confront it, and poke through any different justificating notions they may have built up. A full-grown woman would have rocked your shit, Marcel. A full-grown man would have turned your narrow ass into a doorstop. But kids, they can't fight back, can they? Too small, smaller than you, even. You ain't never been a tough guy, or even a durable guy. You probably grew up getting called a pussy every day of your life. Might have been your daddy, or might have been whatever no-good piece of last cool bar trash your whore of a mama drug home that night. Might have been your gym coach. Might have been the guy who bashed your head into the locker, so as to make his prom queen girlfriend moister than an oyster. The who might not matter, but it was someone, wasn't it? Some motherfucker you've been trying in vain your whole life to prove wrong. You probably spent the Helicon days of your youth drowning kittens and fucking the sleeve of your favorite jacket, never once making a friend, because nobody wants to hang out with a kid who smells like old gym socks and jizz. And you weren't even getting a second glance from the girls you liked. Nope, not at all. Because you never could work up the courage to go talk to them, could you? So now you're a quiet, deranged little fuck who went too far and got caught. You got dropped in a spot where you're treated with the same regard as those kids you messed up, and it scares the shit out of you, don't it? And Marcel screwed his mouth up into a sour-pussed, tight-lipped scowl. He raised his hands up and laid his palms on his cheeks. He knew damn well he couldn't even respond. He knew that much of the score. He had been cast out by polite society, and now was forced to walk amongst monsters who didn't seem to hold him in high regard either. Oh, I could sense the anger in his eyes. I didn't know if anything I had said had rung true or was just insulting enough to get his goat, and I didn't care either. Now, I started again. We both know you ain't gonna do nothing, because if you did, well, you know what is gonna happen to you. And you may not like what your life is right now, but you damn sure don't want to lose it. So go get my coffee, shithill. I spat out the last phrase with as much bile and venom as I could vocally muster. Marcel was shaking at this point. I got the feeling that half the reason he was pressing his hands into his face was just to keep his mouth shut. I could see he was breathing hard, and for a moment I thought he might have the gumption to make a play for the flatware. Sometimes they do. Getting dropped into Bull's heart, knowing there really wasn't an escape, and knowing that you will most likely die with the knowledge of what your insides look like. Well, It could be stressful, even for a sick fuck like Marcel. But eventually, he only nodded. He did in fact know the score. He stared down at me for a moment, eyes cherry red from crying. He was probably trying to figure me out. Why was the normal looking dude so friendly with all of these things that were so mean to him? Shouldn't there be some form of human solidarity? Oh, that was an easy answer. They were people. He was not. Fuck him. Now, I'm sure he wanted to bluster and rage at me. I'm sure he still wanted to snatch up the knife and cut a new mouth in my face. I'm sure I had gotten myself onto some mental list he was building in that deranged little skull of his. I'm sure in his mind he had killed me at least 5 to 6 times in a multitude of exotic and intriguing ways. But what he actually did in reality was finally turn around and go get me my goddamn coffee. I noticed that when he walked behind the counter towards the coffee machine. Bubba Ray and another bit of a local colour named Murray, the fellow who Bubba Ray had been arguing with, both turned an eye towards him. I noticed that the terrified striper seemed to do his best not to look at them, trying to pretend that the two nightmares hadn't just focused a small amount of their attentions on him. I understood why. Bubba Ray could be a scary sight on his own, but Murray, it could be a real perplexing son of a bitch just to look at. I don't mean that in a way, of course, but facts is facts. When a man walks into a diner and plops his head down on the counter, well, that just goes against all notions of nature, and it can be a little disconcerting at first. Plus, it's hard to talk to Murray. I never know where to look. Do I stare at the half-rotten coconut sitting in his hands, or do I look at where his head should be? Plus the fact that Murray was a tiny bit self-conscious about it. It didn't help. I mean, he had no reason to be. Couldn't help how the forces of metaphysics and the great beyond had shaped him. I'll spin you up though. If you ever run across Murray, or a fella with a similar condition, you just talk to the head. Or if he gets bored and starts tossing it hand to hand, and just talk to his chest. Both seem to be acceptable. The striper made it a point not to look at either man and concentrated on the task at hand. He finally brought the cup back to me and set it down wordlessly in front of me. The tremor in his hands only made him spill a little bit. Without a word, he turned to walk away, but I heard a long drawn-out hiss float over my shoulder. Sounded like a mama mountain lion hissing at a wayward cub. The striper froze in his tracks, his body going tense. "Marcel?" Ellie asked with a bit of an annoyed hostility in her voice. Apparently, she had finished up her smoke break. "Did you ask the deputy if he wanted anything else while you were at the table?" He looked over at the old waitress and sheepishly shook his head. "No," he said quietly. His voice marched right up to the line of being dismissive, or as close to it as was safe to do so. He probably wasn't as afraid of Ellie as he was of Toothy L, Bubba Ray or Murray. She may look like a mountain lion, but she was friendly as hell. It was in her nature, and so I could see where he might get a little more comfortable with her. Which, if you know the four of them, is just about the wrong attitude to take. Now don't get me wrong, I wouldn't get in line to tussle with any of them. Swamp monsters, minotaurs, headless horse people are all dangerous in their own right. But Ellie retired though, and she might probably have them all on experience alone. I once found a book in the sheriff's office, Tactical Research Library. It was a transcription of an accounting of a brouhaha Ellie had found herself in, way back in 1300 or some odd year. Somewhere in Proto-Germany, I don't remember which part. The condensed story is that 200 warriors, the best warriors from 3 different principalities at that, went to push her out of the forest she was calling home at the time. Only one of them came back. He was half out of his gourd and holding a cart full of severed heads. A very elegant way of saying, leave me the fuck alone. I briefly wondered if Ellie was going to take his head off. I had asked her about the battle in the Proto-German forest once, and she told me that she didn't really remember much about it. The 1300s were apparently a very wild time in her life, and she could hardly be expected to remember every little scrap she had been in. Which is fair, I guess. And the striper looked at her. Now I may have had him a little worked up from earlier, or the stress might have been getting to him, or he might have just plain old have felt like standing up for himself. "No, I didn't," he said a little louder, damn near glaring at Ellie. "This isn't my job. This isn't right. I shouldn't be here. I shouldn't be surrounded by you things. And this?" He motioned towards me. "Traitor. None of you are real." I noticed that his voice was rising. It was also starting to crack. It sounded like his balls were mid-drop. Racism aside, I can't say a piece of detritus like Marcel implying that I was some sort of race traitor had much of an effect on me. Nevertheless, I eased my hand towards the handle of the large caliber smoke wagon sitting on my duty belt. Not to defend him, of course. I might have been okay with him taking a swing at me, but I didn't like anyone getting lippy with Miss Ellie. As Marcel got defiant, Bubba Ray and Murray dropped the conversation like a sack of bricks. Almost in sync, they spun around on their stools and leaned back against the counter. The counter creaking as Bubba Ray leaned his considerable bulk against it. Murray picked his head up from the bar and placed it on his lap. He jocularly elbowed Bubba in the ribs and pointed at the brewing altercation, and Bubba slapped his elbow away. "I'm watching it too, dumbass." Bubba Ray snorted at his pal. "Now hush up." Ellie's pupils got thin as she stared back at the wayward striper. I noticed that her hands began to flex, her claws slowly sliding out of her fingertips as she worked her fingers, her posture tensed up like she was about to pounce. I noticed that her ears were laid back against her skull. In the background, I noticed a toothy snout sliding out of the kitchen service window, followed by the rest of Toothy Earl's head. It reminded me of the crocodile gliding through water, his reptilian eyes taking in the situation, his forked tongue sliding out of his mouth and slapping at his lips like a lizard. It looked like he was invested in the situation taking place in his dining room. "Listen here, you cheeky little gobshite," she said, her voice more of a low rumble at this point. "Your people cast you out. You were sentenced to death. You were dead as far as anyone of note is concerned." And she was interrupted by my radio squawking to life. A dispatcher calling my name out of the ether, wanting to know my location. Marcel jumped and a little bit of the tension was bled out of the room. "Son of a bitch," I grumbled as I reached down to the handset sitting on my shoulder. "Yeah, Jen, I'm at Earl's," I replied back into the radio. I realized that I hadn't eaten yet. If they were calling me, I might not have a chance to eat tonight, so I shoveled a fork full of eggs into my mouth. "I got Deputies Gruck and Dilliwall responding to a 1016 over at Miller's place. Can I route you over to back them up?" I sighed. Getting between the Millers in the middle of a marital dispute was about the last thing I wanted to do. But I doubted that Gruck and Dilliwall wanted to be there either. And before I could say anything, Ellie pounced forward. Marcel let out a high-pitched squeak and fell back onto his narrow arse. He started screaming and scrambling back as fast as he could. He kicked chairs away with a clatter, and tables fell over. Little bundles of silverware wrapped in napkins were propelled across the room. I could imagine that his life was flashing before his eyes. Ellie came to a stop in front of me. She reached down and picked up my cup of joe. She sped a glare towards the simpering striper, one that bespoke of a lot of matronly anger. She spun on a heel and moved with a purpose towards the coffee machine and the stack of styrofoam to-go cups next to it. Murray and Bubba Ray fell over each other laughing. Murray thumped Bubba Ray's back as he howled with laughter. Bubba Ray himself was in the middle of hitching/snorting laughs himself. Sounded like a bull who was charging a matador. But he had just thought of a really funny joke another bull had told him back in the bullpen. And Toothy Owl was glaring at the destruction of his dining room, or as much as a reptilian swamp monster was capable of glaring. I knew that Marcel was going to have a rough night ahead of him. If he even survived the night was a different question altogether. As funny as the spectacle of it all was, he was a striper, and he had just made a big old whopper of a mistake. My thumb shifted to the PTT button on my handset as soon as the ruckus died down some. Yeah, show me, en route. Wow, 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 wow. Certainly another one. Wow. What a fantastic and intriguing storyline by my good friend RevBlackRage over on Reddit. Big thank you, Rev, for allowing me to narrate this incredible story on the show. I do hope you enjoy my rendition and look forward to more of your work. And of course, as ever, please do let me know what you thought down below in the comments box. Please do like and share. It really does help with the channel and our community further. And why not hashtag TeamFEAR and DMT's Cryptid Crew. If you're an aspiring writer, want to get in touch with myself, the usual email as on screen, which is dmtforesterfear@gmail.com. I really look forward to hearing from you. I hope everybody's well and happy. You're trying to keep fit and focused during these testing times. But above all, guys, remember, be safe, not sorry.